Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is Chander in Palo Alto.
Hello, guys. This is Arne in Oslo.
So, Arne, you were in London recently. How was that?
London was wet and windy. They had floods in the UK. So normal British winter.
So, as expected.
As expected.
Any
They did have pubs with beer inside those. That sort of works the way it's supposed to as well.
Yeah, warm beer. Somehow they drink warm beer there.
Or at least not cold, yeah.
Yeah. Anything different now? The Brexit has happened, or it's officially out, but not yet practically.
Well, I asked a bunch of Uber drivers, so that's the source of real truth in the world, and they hadn't noticed it. So they had not noticed any difference. But they said apparently we're not noticing anything in 11 months.
Okay. So let's come to today's topic, and that's sustainability. And this we picked because it's kind of in the air with what's happening in the world, the fires in Australia.
The floods in London or in England.
Yeah, so it's kind of in the air. And I remember on my visit to the Nordic countries, were mainly Norway and Sweden, a few months ago, this came up a lot. I met a lot of entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs who just want to do something in sustainability. They don't know what it is, but they want to do something for the environment. So I thought, or we thought, both Arne and I, we should discuss that, how to think about sustainability, how it's segmented. There were previous attempts, why they didn't work, and why it would work this time. Yeah, how does that sound, Arne?
Sounds great.
Okay, so let's start with, yeah.
Well, I would actually add to it, it's more than in the air. I would actually say that it's everywhere. In the US these days, there's, a part of the population sort of denying climate change and so forth. But I think it's still more than in the air. It's kind of a mega trend. In the Nordics, it's bigger because of the Greta Thunberg effect and all sorts of things. But that's not just a Nordic phenomenon. And even, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink just recently also had this statement about the fundamental reshaping of finance in the direction of sustainability. So I think it's a mega trend with some momentum everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean by in the air. There is a lot of talk that is right in the air. So let's see how we convert that into action.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay, so how would you define it? When people say sustainability, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think it means different things to different people, but we can sort of frame it in a few different ways. I think the fundamentals of sustainability is something that can sustain. In theory, it can last for a very long time or forever. And an extension of that is saying, well, whatever we do today does not impact the future negatively. So that's sort of the simplest way to look at it. Now, of course, sustainability relates to both the environment, to society, to the economy, and so forth, and can be, therefore addressed in a number of different directions. A lot of people think about, climate and environment first, but actually sustainability overall is I think, a broader topic than just environment and climate.
So what else would be included in that, in addition to environment?
Yeah, so I think the most sort of extensive framework for this is, the UN has developed a set of sustainable development goals that addresses a wide variety of topics, and that's everything from eradicating poverty, hunger, health, education, working conditions, infrastructure for society, as well as environment, so climate, clean water, clean energy, and climate and these sorts of things. So there's 17 areas of goals that the UN has highlighted as areas where sustainability should be developed.
Yeah, great. So we'll post that in the show notes. I looked at them a while ago, but I don't remember now. But I just remembered that I think California just leads in many things, including sustainability or environment care. It's in 2005 or 6, I went to Stanford for an executive program, and I was living in Seattle at the time. And at that time, they had, the plates they served the food in, they were, you could compost them. I thought that was so cool. Like, why didn't that occur to me before? So it's been, at least in this area, has been on people's mind much longer than last few years.
Yeah, and I think there's like if you look at the US, this is there's a big difference from state to state and coast versus middle and so forth as to how high on the agenda this is. And California is certainly I think the state in the US where this is the highest on the agenda.
Yep. Okay, so now, it's basically making the world more sustainable and not harming the world, if you have to, in many aspects. So that you can say is the, very high level view. So now looking at sustainability in terms of, businesses or actions, how do you segment that? One, you could say, okay, the internal combustion engine, they produce a lot of carbon, so move to, electric cars. So that energy could be one area, use solar, etc. So how do you think about that in terms of segmenting the sustainability market?
Well, I think if you think of a business, generally you think about is this an opportunity to sell products and make profit? That's how you think about a business. How you think about sustainability is obviously, do you achieve something in terms of making the world better or more sustainable? And I think once again that UN framework is somewhat good because it sort of has sub goals for a number of these things where it defines how does the world become better and more sustainable. So you can sort of say, well, does it achieve any of those objectives if you buy into the framework thinking? Now, of course, that doesn't mean that's those two dimensions score equally at all times. There are ways of making the world better, but without it being necessarily a good business. And the other way, there are ways of thinking about good businesses that don't necessarily make the world better in some shape or form. But ideally, at least the venture capitalist in me thinks, well, if you can do both, that's great. And that's sort of where you start.
Yeah. So, okay, let me ask another way. So how do you see in terms of investment opportunity, you can say one market that can be disrupted with sustainability is energy production. Another
Right.
market is, let's say, automobiles. Another market could be plastics, use something else instead of plastics. Or so in terms of investments, how do you see markets where sustainability can be applied?
Well, I think it pretty much can be applied in all markets. So I would just look at the business opportunity. So say the energy market itself, right? There's no reason fundamentally to use coal-fired power plants if you can use solar panels.
Well, cost is the reason that it's cheaper.
Well, that is a about to change, actually. So that's the whole business side of it, right? Mm-hmm. Ideally, you'd like to have solar power. So say the capital investment of having a solar power was zero. That's wonderful because you have renewable energy and it costs less than buying electricity because you're burning coal, right? Now, of course, the issue is that as you start out, developing the solar powers and producing them and so forth is more expensive. But as this scales, it becomes cheaper and cheaper. And at some point, and we're not too far off that point, it becomes parity on cost. And then you're better off with the renewable, both from a business perspective and from a sustainability perspective. So that's an example from the energy sector.
Mm-hmm. Actually, the solar, I read in last week's Economist, in India, the cost of solar is now cheaper than coal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, from a personal experience as well, I'm a private investor in a hydroelectric power plant, and that's an old technology. It's been around for more than 100 years. You produce electricity by rain falling on Earth, and you use the altitude difference between a water reservoir and a turbine, and you produce electricity. That is a very, very cheap form of electricity. It's just that it's not scalable and interesting in a venture perspective. Simply because you're limited by how much it rains and the area you have to collect that rain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean it's location dependent and weather dependent, of course.
Exactly.
Okay, so these attempts you may recall in like almost a decade or more ago in Silicon Valley, there was a huge push towards clean tech. And most of those investments did not pan out. I think Khosla Ventures was the most bullish one. So what's your view, Arne, at that time? Why didn't it work?
Yeah, so you're right. I think there was the period was the height of the sort of the clean tech period of investing in Silicon Valley was 2008 to 2012. And I think there was like something like $8 billion or something going into it to clean tech, and it was mostly sort of solar energy type of companies. These are the investors were your typical VC firms investing into solar, and now VC firms is a particular kind of investment vehicle that thrives on scalable technology that grows very fast. And as a matter of fact, the solar industry has grown very fast. It's grown on an annual basis about plus minus 30% over the last 10 years. So actually, from that perspective, you would have thought that this was an industry that was very well suited to the venture capital model. However, solar technology is very different from software or these types of technologies that venture firms normally invest in, and they're not scalable in the same way. So if you sell software as a service, essentially your incremental cost for another copy is close to zero, and your gross margins are very high. And ultimately, you invest in people who develop this and sales and marketing. The difference between solar is that you require very big factories. It's a large-scale industrial scaling, and when you need lots of factories, you need capex for those factories, and that's just a much more industrial way of building a company. And most of the capital scales and the capacity scales on a linear basis with a much lower gross margin. So this is much less suited to the venture capital model. and more to an industrial investment model. And ultimately, what has happened to the industry is essentially that China has won the industry because they've had access to cheap capital and the ability to build huge factories based on their industrial model. Hence, I think that's the main reason why that wave didn't pan out.
When you say industrial model, you mean state-sponsored capitalism?
In the Chinese model, the state plays a very important role in providing cheap capital when you have hard investments and the capex for that. So that's an important part of it. And secondarily, building big factories is a different skill than building teams that build software products.
Well, of course, I mean, many skills, hardware development is different than software, and these marketplaces, of course, that's all different. I think the big difference is the upfront capex requirement. But you see that challenge with Tesla. I mean, they built the whole thing from scratch. But in that case, I think what I saw was they understood just being environment friendly is not enough. You have to have the design and the cool appeal. The previous attempts that were made with electric cars were just, didn't pay as much attention to design. So they were targeted towards, people who care about the environment, not mainstream. The Tesla, they have built factories. They have very successful car. I mean, they basically changed the entire industry.
Yes, but I think I'm not pretending to say that Tesla is an easy company to build. On the contrary, but there are clear differences between Tesla and the solar industry. One, Tesla is ultimately a consumer product, so it involves end user design in a different way, and sales and marketing to the public in a different way. And secondarily, it's also a complex system with a lot of software. And I think that software and services package is somewhat different than brute force scaling large production capacity, which turned out to be the main competing advantage, competitive advantage in the solar industry, together with the capital cost.
Yeah, I think it was more, it's still happening, but it's not happening from the venture point of view. Like China basically dominates solar panels because they have subsidies from the government, their capital costs are lower, and they basically flooded the market. So you couldn't really compete if you were a venture-backed solar panel manufacturing company in Palo Alto.
I completely agree with that, but I would take it further and say that the venture model, the way that it's developed today, is ill-suited for large-scale production where you need a lot of capex to build production capacity. Other financing forms are better suited for that compared to what the venture industry is today.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the cost. But it's possible. That's what I was countering. Tesla was built on venture model, and it is huge cost. But Elon Musk invested, I don't know, 100+ million of his own money, and he could raise capital and get. So I agree with you. It's different, but I'm saying it's possible. And now there's so much money in PE, so it is possible. But it's huge risk. Yeah, like if your fund is, $1 billion, you're not gonna invest, half of that in one company so that they can build a factory.
Yes, and I would still claim that, I mean, private equity is a broad bag of assets and ventures or investment strategies as well. However, the traditional Silicon Valley model thrives when costs are linear, but revenue and growth is more exponential. That's when you see the biggest outcomes, and that's why the capital congregates around those opportunities, because the model works better that way.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move to like why. So people, who I met in Sweden and Norway, they want to do a startup, something to do with sustainability. Why do you think this is the right time? Why it has higher chances of working today than 10 years ago?
Yeah, so I don't think necessarily all cases that have a sustainability angle has a better opportunity of succeeding, beyond the fact that the macro environment is more attuned to these offerings, and also capital allocation broadly. Example, the BlackRock situation is looking to invest more into sustainability than it used to be before. Mm-hmm. That said, I think targeting a sustainability in itself does not make it a successful business. But I think the opportunities are there to both with new technologies that can be used to address sustainability, an understanding of how the funding models work, and the fact that both great founders and consumers are looking for these things, provides a good environment for it today. Thus, I think we will see a number of successes as well as a number of failures. But I think the ratio of successes will be higher than when you look at the sort of the single track clean tech investment strategy of the 2010 or thereabout.
Yeah. I think one difference I see now compared to 10, 15 years ago is the younger people care more. They just demand from companies in the products they buy. They care how it was made, is it organic, how will we dispose of it? So they're more aware. So consumers, drive a lot of things, at least in this country. So that's a reason, one of the reasons this might be, this might be a good time. And
absolutely,
but it's not always direct. For example, people like real. So that's a marketplace where you can sell your used clothing and other items. So that's a kind of a business in the sustainability world, because the items you're going to throw away and they might have ended up in a dumpster or who knows where. Now there is this like secondhand economy for fashion clothing, and it's acceptable now to wear like vintage and these buy on real. Poshmark is something similar where you can sell your stuff.
Yeah, I think that's spot on with the younger generation as demanding consumers. I think that certainly has an important part of it. But also being a venture capitalist, the most important raw material we have is super talented founders who are ambitious. And the new generations of founders as well go after these opportunities.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important driver as well, right? So a founder, 10 years ago, the best founders would maybe say that, in the online media or social media or in ad tech or something, that's where the good pickings are. Now, of course, those segments are not quite so interesting as they used to be, as well as those best founders are now mission driven.
Mm-hmm.
and they will drive great companies while addressing real pains in the market and consumers wanting these things. And I think they will understand how to employ the types of technologies that do scale to solve these problems. So, say, artificial intelligence can be applied to a number of industries to solve real-world problems that support sustainability. And these founders will find a way to do so and build a lot of value while building sustainable companies. And we've invested in some of these that we're very excited about.
Yeah. So you have, how many companies are in your portfolio?
23 for the time being.
Okay. How many of them are in the sustainability bucket?
So I think that depends on how you count it, right? I think about 21 of them addresses some element of sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
Would you brand them as pure play sustainability companies? Probably not. Then that would be a handful that sustainability is like the core value proposition of the company. But the vast majority of them has a sustainability effect.
Okay. So can you give me an example, well, me and the listeners, of a company that is sustainability is core to their mission, and one that sustainability is, is a side thing or one of the value propositions?
Yeah. So say two examples where it's sort of core. We've invested in a company called Shoreline. Mm-hmm. They provide a software to optimize operations of offshore wind farms, both the construction of it and operation and maintenance. Essentially, what their software does is drive down the OPEX, both the CAPEX and the OPEX of operating offshore wind farms, and hence make that closer to break even, or cost parity to coal-fired power plants, for example. Mm-hmm. That's a core sustainability investment. Another one is a company called Aquabite. They do a computer vision and machine learning system for fish farming. And what you use that for is to reduce a pest called sea lice, as well as looking after other health conditions, and also optimize feeding of fish in fish farms. Hence, you have less feed waste, and which also reduces the feeding cost and environmental waste around feeding fish, for example. So those are like core, sustainability investments. So then you can say, well, we have a company that does a more efficient data analytics platform in the cloud called Swarm64. Mm-hmm. They accelerate databases and so forth. And the primary benefit to customers is essentially that their analytics is faster and better. But the secondary effect of it is also that it uses less energy in the data centers.
Yeah, that's great. That's very good examples. I think now in our listeners' mind, it would be clear when it's core and when it's like a side effect or one of the values. So the 21 out of 23 is excellent, Arne. So I'm glad you are contributing to the world being more sustainable.
Absolutely. And this is also why I'm sort of excited about it, right? Because if you take the two first examples, these are technologies, that use the, machine learning, AI, these sorts of things that are very modern and are typically very fashionable industries that have great scaling effects from a venture capital perspective, but they also address like real world problems and, you know, save customers money, increase their efficiency, while also then having this effect, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in Norway, are there any government initiatives to, you know, encourage startups to invest or create companies in this area? Or is there government money available to entrepreneurs? What is the government doing in this regard?
Well, in Norway, there are government grants for both building businesses, typically R&D based businesses, as well as there's sort of more pure play R&D grants. Mm-hmm. There are some smaller programs, or maybe not so small, but let's say more targeted around different aspects of sustainability, as well as ESG, as the short term for it is an evaluation parameter for like the broader tools around funding of startups from the government or R&D from the government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And I know that Sweden has this Sustainability 2030 initiative. So I'm not 100%, but most likely now if you want to get funded through Vinnova, which is one of their agencies, you have to meet, you know, like that is one of the check boxes you have to meet to get funding from Vinnova. So in terms of, let's say if you're an entrepreneur, I would say, you know, find an sustainability angle. Like, for example, real example I gave, I think when they started, they weren't thinking of sustainability. They were thinking, you know, there's a marketplace. But now you can have that angle, or think about that angle, how you can impact the environment. And then if you are doing it for passion or you know, core sustainability business, like the examples Arne gave about the software for the wind farming company, there, you know, it's the market currently may be smaller, but I think it'll only get bigger. What advice do you have, Arne, for people who are, you know, starting companies now or have companies, how they can, you know, leverage this trend of sustainability in their favor?
So I think even the core sustainability companies I talked about here, they ultimately start with a customer problem that they're looking to solve. And that's like any business, to be honest. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to have an important customer problem to solve, otherwise you don't have a great business. Now, of course, there are customers who just have sustainability problems. And so the fish farming, you know, the sea lice is a real problem. Mm-hmm. And so is wasting feed, right? So I would always, for all businesses, start with the fundamental sort of business problem you're looking to solve. Secondarily, I would look into, well, how does it also, is it aligned with sustainability or is it not? And if it's not, it's probably not a great long-term business, and I can come back to that point. But if it's sort of aligned, then you have an opportunity that can stretch into the future. And then, of course, if it also solves a big problem from a sustainability perspective, all the better. But I think at least it has to be somewhat aligned to what the future looks like. And the reason why I'm saying that is, well, and the third thing to think about, certainly if you're looking to build a great company that should be valuable quick, is this fundamental scalability thing that I talked about before, and that's where it sort of also becomes aligned as a venture capital investment for something that can become big fast. But if I go back to the sort of the alignment issue around sustainability, mm-hmm. One of the things when you invest in these sorts of companies is that that timing is always difficult, and if your window of opportunity is short, it's generally not a good business opportunity, because this has to do with fundamentals, right? In a pure play financial perspective, the value of a company is the value of future cash flows, right? That becomes much more complex in reality, but that's sort of a way of thinking about it. And if you're hitting a time window that's short, that stretch of cash flows is not going to be long. And so if it's something that's unsustainable, you have an end date no matter what, which means that you don't have an infinite tail or a long tail of future for the company, and hence that undermines it being a good business. And this is also where, if you look at big outcomes from a venture capital perspective, these are the ones that grow and the growth compounds. So this is something you'll like as a Warren Buffett fan, this compounding interest. So if you have a company that can grow fast and the growth compounds year over year over year, and it never ends, that's like investment nirvana. Yeah. And sustainability is aligned with that, whereas unsustainable ones, you can think about like the tail falling off, and it's just a worse business than something that's sustainable. And that's an angle to think about it from as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's sustainable, unsustainable, but there's a neutral. You can create a software company that is neither sustainable or unsustainable, so that will be fine. But things which are declining, let's say you have a new technology for the coal manufacturing, or converting energy or getting energy from coal, that may not be that will fall in the unsustainable category. Exactly. Like you want aligned with the market that's growing. Sustainability is a market that's growing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's perfectly acceptable to have a business that has no impact. It could be pure entertainment, for example.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly reasonable and can be a long-term business. Of course, I think if you're solving an important problem, and you can also claim that that you make the world better in some dimension, that helps in marketing to various stakeholders and creates more excitement around the company, and can help be a growth engine for the company. But I think the bar should be at certainly not doing something unsustainable, and it's also not great business if you think about the long term.
Yeah, and if you get successful with the neutral business, then you can always donate money, just like Bezos is donating $10 billion to environmental causes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good. So on that note, thanks for joining us. We will see you next week.
Wonderful. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.